Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Pilot Record Database webinar series. Please be advised that your microphones and cameras are disabled by default. If you have any questions during the event, please use the Q&A function, which is located at the bottom of your screen. Thank you all for attending today. I will now be turning it over to our facilitator, Ashley Spencer. Please begin when you're ready.
Casey, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Ashley. And thank you for joining us today for the today's pilot record database, where we'll be going over registering and reviewing records. I'm Stacy Smith. I am the PRD Assistant Program Manager. Also on today's webinar with us is Chris Morris, the PRD Program Manager, and our PRD support team, Julie Powell, Scott McLean, and Pamela Scott. Together, we all will help answer your questions, and we also manage the PRD support box. So if you ever have questions and you reach out to us, one of us will be answering. In addition, this presentation will be available on our PRD website in the resources section. So if there's anything that you need to go back and check, please feel free to check on our website. So just before we get started, if you have any questions during the webinar, please submit the questions through our Q&A box there on the bottom. We'll either reply to your question through the box, answer at the end of our presentation, or email a response to you soon after. And again, like I said, the presentation will be available on our website as well for reference. So, okay, for today's webinar, we'll focus on the following 4 areas: the origins and PRD concept, what's in the PRD, how to register for our pilot users and for our operators, granting consent and reviewing records in the PRD, and last, we'll close out with any questions that you'll have. So we'll get started with how we got here today with the PRD. In 1996, Congress enacted the Pilot Records Improvement Act in response to some air carrier accidents and recommendations from the NTSB. Later, the Airline Safety and Federal Aviation Administration Extension Act of 2010 was passed by Congress. This required the creation of an electronic database to contain pilot records, today known as the Pilot Record Database. Its intent was to solve any of the challenges and issues with record sharing under the PREA Act. In 2010, the FAA issued Part 111 to help transition over the next few years from PREA over to PRD. As of today, the PRD has been available since late 2017. Now let's take a look at the concept with PRD. So as I mentioned earlier, the PRD was established to resolve the challenges with record sharing under PREA. So previously, the air carriers and operators would request the information individually for the hiring, with the hiring process. And, it would create like a lag in the response time. So as you can see in this diagram over here, there was a lot going on. Now with the PRD process, it streamlines and creates a centralized location for all of the pilot's records and information, improving the process overall. So now we'll take a look at the reporting requirements for air carriers and operators. For the entities required to report and review records in PRD, Part 111 requires that Part 121 air carriers, Part 135 air carriers, Part 125 operators, fractional operators who operate under Part 91 Subpart K, and air tour operators are all required to both report and review records in the system. The following are only required to report information in PRD. This includes entities conducting public aircraft operations. This would include police departments and other public operations. In addition, Part 91 operators, they operate 2 or more type-rated aircraft or turbine engine powered rotorcraft in regards of business and 125M. This includes like the corporate flight departments. If you need any additional information for the reporting requirements, please review Part 111 and AC 12068J for details. We also have the links to these resources on our website. So next, let's take a look at the information that's currently available in PRD today. Currently, we have pilot information, pilot and medical certificates, notices of disapprovals, accidents, and incidences. It's important to note that this includes both pilot command and second command, since PRD is regulated by another statute separate from PREA. And last, enforcements. Starting next month, which is right around the corner, the PRD's capabilities will expand to include industry records, drug and alcohol testing records, training qualification and proficiency records, final disciplinary action records, final separation from employment records. And at this time, we currently have about 35,000 registered users and are providing over 3,000 pilot records per month. So we have a lot going on right now. Next, let's take a look at, I'll do a little demonstration to go over creating a MyAccess account, creating a PRD account. We'll also take a look at how pilots can review their records, provide consent. And then last, we'll go over how operators review records once the consent is given. Okay, so it's important to note that a MyAccess account must be created in order to access PRD, whether you're a pilot or an operator. This MyAccess account is also used to log in. It can be used to log into several different websites, not just the PRD with the FAA. I think we have had some questions that there are some other government agencies that will use external MyAccess accounts. So it's important to know that we do use a different server. So I think like VA, if you have a MyAccess account with the VA, most likely you'll have to register for another MyAccess account with the FAA in order to access our system. In addition, it's important to note that you can only have a single MyAccess account regardless of how many different websites you use. So please do not try to create any additional MyAccess accounts if you have any problems or anything. It can create issues further along in the process. And last, it will require an ID verification in order to create the account during the process. It's also important to note if you're having any trouble accessing or creating a MyAccess account for pilots, you can still participate by submitting an 8060-14. The link is available on our site. Fill out the form, take a picture, and send it over to our email, our PRD support email. We'll respond within 24, usually 1 business day, Monday through Friday. For the operators and proxy employees, if you're having any trouble creating an account in MyAccess, please reach out to us directly at PRD support, and we will work with you to create an account on our end. Also, we recently did upgrade our system, so if you've had any issues in the past, please go back and try again. Since we've made that update, I think we've had about like a 95% success rate creating a MyAccess account. So now let's take a look at the process for registering in MyAccess. First, you'll go to our website. You can type in prd.faa.gov. It works best to use either Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge. Pilots, you'll start over here at the top of the page where it says Pilot Access. Click on the link. Next, you will come to the MyAccess registration page. You'll select the bar over here in the bottom. So it says don't have an account, sign up here. From here, it will take you to the registration page where you will be asked to complete your personal information. Just some tips when you're registering. The name that's used in your MyAccess account must match your name on your printed pilot certificate. So if you have two last names, a hyphenated last name, any suffixes, junior, the second or the third, it must match exactly. When you get to the next page to enter PRD, your last name will autofill and you will not be able to make any changes to your last name in the system. Again, it's very important. Please do not create more than one MyAccess account. It can create an issue where you'll have multiple PRD accounts and you'll have trouble accessing your information in the future. And then once you're finished creating your MyAccess account, you'll be able to register in PRD. So pilots, after you create your MyAccess account, we'll go back over to the FAA page at prd.faa.gov. When you go back, just a couple of things to remember. It usually takes about 15 minutes for your MyAccess account to register in the system. So I know you'll be excited to get in there, but please wait so that everything can validate through the system. Then when you go back, either clear your browsing data for like the last hour, clear your cache, or perhaps try another browser. For instance, if you use Microsoft Edge, use Chrome, or if you use Chrome, try Edge instead. Sometimes that creates, there might be a little bit of an issue logging in. Again, get to the website, select Pilot Access. You'll be taken to the login page, but this time, since you have your account, you'll go ahead and enter your email address in the space here. Select Next. And from here, you'll be taken to the PRD registration page for the first time. And like I said, over here is you'll see that your last name will auto-populate. Go ahead, fill out your first name, your pilot certificate number. It's important to note, I know a lot of airline pilots will also have a CFI or a UAS certificate. Make sure that you use your ATP or your commercial pilot's license number, and also the most recent date of issuance on your certificate. From here, you'll click on Submit and register into PRD. If you have any trouble at all registering, please send us an email to the PRD support and include your certificate information and a screenshot of the issues when you email us, and we'll try to troubleshoot things on our end to help register you into the system. So that's it. With that part of it getting in there. Next, next we'll go over the registration process for our operator employees. That includes the air carrier and proxies. Again, we'll start over at our website, prd.faa.gov. When you get over here, make sure to go to the tools section. Again, click on the link. The link will take you to the registration page. Click on the bottom where it says don't have an account. And from here, you'll complete the registration information, pretty similar to what I just used for, showed you with the pilot's registration process. A couple of things to note here for the operators, the operator users and the proxy operator users. Don't use the work email. We recommend to use a personal email. That way the MyAccess account stays with you if you go to a different job or anything like that. That way you'll have access to the email if you have any issues in the future. And again, as I mentioned earlier, please hold off if you have any issues from creating any multiple MyAccess accounts. If you have a MyAccess account with one email and then you try to create an account with another email, when you register in the PRD, if you've been authorized roles, you won't be able to access any of that information. They'll have to go back and re-register. Again, it can create a lot of issues with the system. So once you've completed the process to create that MyAccess account, we'll go back over to the PRD website at prd.faa.gov. And this time you'll select tools to register for your access. It'll bring you to the page to log in, enter your email, select next, then you'll enter your password. And from here, you can start the registration process to register to be a responsible person, authorized consumer, authorized contributor, user manager. We also have some guides at the bottom of our page to help you through the registration process. And in addition, we're always available at the PRD support at faa.gov if you need any additional help or have questions about the types of users, anything like that. So like I said, we have the rules there, and we're also always available to help and answer your questions. Now let's take a look at working with the records, the general process for the pilots, how to log into PRD, update the information with the last 5 years of your employment history, review records, grant consent for the aviation employees. Then we'll take a look at the aviation employer and how the operators and proxies log into PRD. Search for a pilot by certificate and name. View and save the PRD airman record. And still request non-FAA records using the traditional. Oh, I'm sorry. It's important that during this process, as we transition over from PRIA over to PRD, you do still need to use the traditional PRIA process to access records unless they're available in PRD. And the FAA portion of it for the records is available in PRD. Okay, we'll get started with the next part of our demonstration for pilots and go over how to grant consent in PRD. Again, we'll start over at our website, click on the pilot access link. Once you go through the login, it'll bring you to a page to select your role. Make sure you select pilot in the dropdown. From here, it will take you to the page which displays your information. Check everything to make sure it's correct. First, you will go in pilots. Just remember, it's important to remember, enter your experience and your employment history first. Otherwise, if you rush to grant consent, when the employer goes back to check the consent record, none of the information that you enter afterwards will be shared in your part. So first, go over here to experience. When you get over to this page, you'll be able to type in the information in the employer section, and usually it'll autofill. And from there, you can select the correct air carrier. Once you have the correct air carrier, click on Add Selected. From here, a little window will show up saying employer successfully added. Click OK. Then you will see the employer's information populate down here in the bottom. After all of your experience and employment history for the last 5 years has been entered into the system, then we can go over here to the consent section over here on top. So once you get to this screen, you can click on the link to view your PAR, your pilot airman record, to check to make sure all the information is correct and that the history that you just entered did save correctly. So you'll click on it, and usually it'll be a PDF file, or depending on the settings on your computer, it might be another window that opens. And you should be able to review your information from here. Once you review the information, go back over and you can type in the information for the air carrier that you're granting access to. Over here in the consent period, it gives you the option of selecting 30 days, 40 days, 45 days, or 60 days for the period. Once that information is completed, we will click on grant consent. A window will pop up with a statement to certify that you agree to all the information provided in your airman record. Click on agree. And the next window will show that consent has been successfully granted for the air carrier. Click on OK. Then you will see the box down here on the bottom that you currently have an active consent for the air carrier. And you'll see the effective date and the expiration date. And again, you can also click over here on the PDF to view the information. Now, if you need to revoke the consent, or maybe you selected the wrong carrier, then we'll just check this box over here. Select the revoke consent. And the consent will be revoked. That air carrier will no longer be able to access your information in the system. Click on OK. And that's it. You can also go back. If you're not sure if something went through, you can go back and check. I'll go back over to the screen and You can check your log over here. That's always really helpful as well to make sure that all the information for your employment was saved, and you can also get a history on when you entered the information, when you granted consent as well, and everything too. So that's really helpful also when you're going through there and reviewing your information within the system. So now let's take a look at the other end for the aviation employers for reviewing the airman records in PRD once the consent has been granted. We'll start again at our PRD webpage. Once you've completed the registration process, click on this top link over here for view records. Sometimes if you have trouble going through and you're not getting the right roles or having issues, it's often because the wrong link was selected at the beginning. So select the correct link. Again, it'll take you to our login page for MyAccess, enter your information. And from here, you will go to the PRD page where you'll select your role. If you're reviewing airmen records, select the authorized consumer role. For those of you that register as a responsible person, just want to note that in the drop down, responsible person is not a role that you'll see in PRD. That's for an authorization in PRD, but not for actually using the system to review records and everything. So sometimes for the responsible persons, it's a little confusing when you're logging in. So again, for the employers, we'll select your role for authorized consumer, select the air carrier that you're reviewing the records for. It is possible to have access to multiple carriers. This is always important to make sure you're selecting the correct air carrier. Then we'll go from here to the next page where you'll enter the pilot's information. So make sure that it's important to note that you'll enter both the pilot certificate number and the pilot's last name. If you don't enter both pieces of information, then it won't let you pull up the record. From here, we'll select search. And if everything is correct, the airman's record will pull up in PRD. If you're having any trouble, just go back, always double check, make sure that the certificate number is correct. And make sure that the pilot gave you the correct certificate number. Sometimes the numbers get transposed and you won't be able to find the information in there. But if you have any other problems, always feel free to reach out to us and we can check things on our end. So as I said, once you enter the pilot's information, the airman's record will show up here on the bottom that there's an active consent for your air carrier. Make sure that you click on the box. Click on add to cart. Then a window will pop up saying the car has been selected, added to the cart. Select OK. If you're reviewing multiple airmen's records, you can enter all the information for the pilot and then do this part last. Once it's complete, the information, you'll get like a zip file at the bottom where you'll be able to see and download the records in a PDF, or sometimes it might be another browser depending on the settings on your computer. Download the information. And from here, you will be able to save the PAR for your records and show that you reviewed the pilot's information in the pilot record database. So it's a pretty easy process, but if you ever have any trouble with anything, please feel free to reach out to us at PRD support. And in addition, we also have resources and guides listed on our website. We also have the links to our guidance and any other resources that you may need. For really important, I know the date that we're getting all the questions are next month is when industry will be required to start entering records. So we'll have a webinar on June 16th on how to enter records in PRD. In addition, we do currently have a user guide posted where you can go review how to enter it, but just keep in mind that you won't have access until any of those features until June. So this concludes the demonstration portion of our webinar for today. I'll take a look here and see if we have any questions that we can add, or I'm sorry, answer for today. Okay. Let's see.
Stacy asked me to join in to answer questions, so I'm gonna let Stacy pick the questions, and then I'll try and help with the answers.
I'm going through them. Okay. Here's one question from Valerie Graham. We're not there yet, but this is for a record reporting that starts next month. And is it required to enter every negative drug test date into the system for PRD?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to give you kind of a very generalized answer. Because I think to enter every drug test, that's not really required. There is a list in the back of the AC 12068 Juliet. If you look in that list, it talks about exactly what type of drug and alcohol records are to be reported to PRD. And yeah, it's not going to be every report, but there are certain, and they're kind of itemized in there. So I think that's where I'm going to point you for the answer. And if you look at that and you still have questions, please just shoot us an email, prd.faa.gov. All right, what else you got in there, Stacy?
Okay, let's see. This is a common question as a pilot and a user, and I'm assuming that this means for your company, would you need multiple MyAccess accounts?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Because it gives us the opportunity to say, no, you do not want to ever create multiple MyAccess accounts. You only just need the one. And because you can register in PRD for multiple roles, so you could register as a pilot and you can register as a responsible person or, whatever is appropriate. And then when you log into PRD using that one MyAccess account, PRD is going to see that you hold multiple roles, and it's going to ask you, what would you like to do? It's going to kind of like, what hat do you want to put on today? Do you want to put on the pilot hat, or do you want to put on the employer hat, so to say? So thank you for asking the question. No, you don't ever want to have multiple MyAccess accounts. And we know it happens from time to time. People will have multiple accounts, and it usually results in a lot of confusion, or it just makes it complicated. So try to avoid that as much as you can. That's a good question. Thanks.
Here's a question about the 8060-14. From Nanette, she recently had a pilot fill out the consent form and emailed it in. She'd just like to know how our department updates the information or has updated the information in PRD.
Okay, yeah, I think I see what the question would be. So it sounds like what you're asking is maybe how long does it take for us to process the form, and then how do you know that we processed the form? So what generally happens is when a pilot submits an 8060-14 to our office, it normally gets processed within a day. Very limited circumstances that might take 2 business days maybe, but usually it's quite quick. And what happens after we process the 8060-14 is we will reply back to the person that submitted the form by email, and we'll say, hey, we've processed your request. So it's kind of like if the pilot is the one that sent the form to us, it's going to kind of be on the pilot to then let you know, hey, it's done, it's ready, go check it. You could just, as an employer, maybe you could just wait a day or two and then go try to pull the record, but you can't, it's kind of hard to know if you're if you're going to get a result or not. So it's probably best if the person that is requesting the consent just let you know that, hey, I've done it, you can go in there and pull my record. Good question.
Okay, Chris, I have a question about the 125 operators, and I forgot to cover this. What is a 125M operator, and what's the designator code, and how would I find mine in PRD from Kyle?
Man, that's like the advanced level question, but I'll try to give you a pretty efficient answer on it. So a 125 operator, I have to kind of define that before I can tell you what an M operator is, but a 125 operator is typically an operator that operates a big aircraft, like maybe a Boeing 737, so a big airplane, but they're not operating for hire. They're not like an airline. We see these a lot with like sports teams or bands. These sort of folks will operate sometimes, a great big airplane, but it's not like they're not just buying tickets on, an airline. So that's a 125 operator, generally speaking. And then the question about what is a 125M operator is there's a subset of those folks that are provided relief from certain regulations under Part 125. And they are just sort of grouped into this group called a 125M operator. We also call them letter of deviation holders or LODA operators. It's all kind of the same thing. So that, I don't know if that helped you any, but that's a 125 versus a 125M operator. And then your other question was, well, what's a designator and how do I get one? Well, a designator is just every air carrier gets a unique code from the FAA that's used to identify that company. And it's only part of their air carrier certificate number. But the first 4 characters are called the designator. And it's a 4-digit unique code. And we like to use the designator a lot in PRD because it prevents any confusion about which company that we're talking about. If a pilot says, hey, I want you to release my records to American Charters, I'm just making up a name here. Well, the PRD folks might go into the system and find 6 different companies that have a name very similar to American Charters. Whereas if you say, I want to release my records to designator, and then give us that 4-digit code, that clearly tells us who we're talking about. Now, if you are an operator and you need your designator, but you don't know what it is, the easiest place to get it is it's printed at the bottom of every page of your operation specifications. If you aren't sure what operation specifications are, you will find them in your general operations manual. You may have a big manual, perhaps it's called by another name, but it will include your designator. And if all else fails, ask your chief pilot or director of operations, hey, what's my designator? And then they'll tell you, because I promise they'll have it. So hope that answers that one. We have anything else, Stacy?
Yes, sir. A common question that we get quite a bit is, will all pilots in an organization be required to create the MyAccess and account in PRD in order for the air carrier to enter the records beginning in June?
Yeah, that is a really great question. The answer is no. Pilots that work for a reporting entity, that's just the group name that we call those folks, really doesn't have to take any action whatsoever to facilitate their records being entered into PRD. An employer can report records to PRD regardless of whether the pilot can even spell PRD. So no, they don't have to worry about it. The pilot would only need to do that if they wanted to go in and look at their records, or they were going to go to another employer and they needed to release, to grant consent, like what Stacy showed you today.
I have another question from Deanne Jervis about the reporting, and will companies be required to enter every training the pilot has had in the past 5 years, or just the most current training?
Oh, that's a very good question. So the answer is it depends on what type of employer that you are. If you, and by that, I mean, if you're a 121 operator or a Part 135 operator or a 91K operator, there's all these different groups. And so you really would need to go look at AC 12068 Juliet, or you could go look at Part 111. But that's the super high level answer is it depends how far back you go. But really the time frame for how far back you have to report pilot records is a lot further back than just 5 years, because 5 years is what was required under PREA. But in 2010, like Stacy mentioned at the start of the presentation, when Congress amended that requirement, that law really, because it's US law that requires the existence of the PREA system and of the PRD. So in 2010, Congress amended that and they set aside that 5-year limit when we're talking about PRD. In fact, Congress said that the database will contain records for the pilot for the life of the pilot. So what that created is essentially a requirement to go back as far as 2010 to report these pilot records, and in some cases as far back as 2005. So if you're picking your jaw off the floor and hearing that, and you have more questions around it, I would really direct you over to the AC, where it talks about it in quite a bit of length and explains it. And if you have questions beyond that, just shoot us an email, prd.faa.gov.
We have a question from John that I just want to touch on, because we recently did switch over systems for the verification process, and it's for the people that are having issues with verifying their identity and going through the authentication process for it. Do we have additional information that we can provide to our customers for it?
Yeah, that is a super common question. It sounds like that question is about just kind of the initial registration in general and the ID verification, but I'll try to answer that one, and then I'll probably try and just mention the account migration that's had to happen since the 10th. I think that's the right date of May. So the first part is, short answer, yes, everyone that creates a MyAccess account has to complete an identity verification process. And Stacy mentioned it, that's what's happening in the background when it asks you for your driver's license number or your cell phone number. And essentially what's happening is the system is comparing what you're providing against public records to say, is this the right person that's registering? And we were under, the previous system that was doing this ID verification had about an 80% success rate. which is tricky, because that means that 20% of people that are trying to get into PRD aren't able to get in. And of course, we have processes for that, like the 8060-14 and stuff. But we did upgrade that system maybe a couple of months ago, I think. And so now we have about a 95% success rate and making a positive ID verification. So we're able to get a lot more folks in the system. And I know for sure Stacy mentioned this, if you're in that 5% that are having trouble getting the ID verification to pass, what we can provide in relief kind of depends on if you're a pilot or if you work for an airline or whatever. So I recommend just emailing us at prd.faa.gov. And then the other part I want to touch on, just in case this was the question, was what's involved in this account migration and what that means. And basically what happened on May 10th, I believe was the day. On May 10th, they made some software changes to the system that logs you in. So it's still using MyAccess, but it looks different. The page looks different. So like if you used PRD on May the 1st, and then you came back on you came back today on May 19th, it would look different to you. The login page looks different. And of course, that throws people, because you're like, oh, why is it different? And then additionally, there is a little bit of a account migration required, because most folks that type in their email, and you had a PIN number under MyAccess previously, if they type in their email and their PIN, they're going to see it won't let them log in. And so they have to go through basically resetting their password. There's at the bottom of that page, there's a little link that says, if you need help logging in, and you click that, and then it's going to say reset password. And there's a little bit of a couple of hoops to jump through, because you have to set a new password. And it's also going to make you set up a multi-factor authentication in MFA. That's required. There's no way around that. It's got to do with security requirements. But once you get a new password and you set up that MFA, then you can go back and log into PRD just like you did on May 1st. It has the same account and everything. So hopefully that answers the question. What else you got, Stacy?
Okay, I have a question from Nick H. Is there a liability protection for the company if a pilot is terminated from employment and it is reported to PRD? Obviously, there would be documentation to verify this. With PREA, we ask this of potential employees, former employers, but have never received verification that a pilot has been terminated, even when the pilot confirms they were fired from another company.
Yeah, good question. There are some liability protections built into the statute, the original law that requires PRD. But that's, I think that question probably deserves a little bit more analysis for me to give you a real proper response. So I would just encourage you to email that one to us at prd.faa.gov, and then we can give you a more thorough bit of feedback. But generally, yes. If you email me, I can send you a hyperlink, to the US code that talks about those protections. You have anything else?
Thank you. I'm scrolling through. I guess, well, quickly back to this question from Kira about downloading the records from the PRD. If there's her background vendor is having issues downloading the 8060-10 forms from PRD, and would like to know if the 8060-10 record download is identical to the 8060-11 and -12 record download shown in today's webinar.
Yeah, so the reason that they are having trouble accessing the 8060-10, and I hate to throw out numbers because people are like, what does that mean? That form is the FAA record request form that we've used since like 1997. And that's the form that employers use to request these pilot records from the FAA, because the FAA has very specific records about pilots, and that's the mechanism that we've used since 1997 or so to request that. But that form is no longer valid. It's no longer accepted. And we've tried to remove it from our forms website. And so that's why if you're finding it hard to get your hands on the form, that's why. I'm sure there's still a billion copies floating around, but we don't accept them anymore. And the reason is because Part 111 requires that since December the 9th of 2021, that hiring employers have to use the PRD system to obtain those FAA records. So that was a pretty big switch that happened last December. And that really was real notable because that was the first time that actually using the website was required to take place. It wasn't just a voluntary option. So that's why. And then the other form, there's several other 8060 series forms. Those other forms are still available and still in use and can be used to request records from previous employers because PREA is still here. It's still in place. It's just running alongside PRD now. And the reason for that is because although PRD is in effect and in June, people will start to populate the PRD system with pilot records. As you can imagine, it's thousands and thousands and thousands of pilot records, and it's going to take some time to get those records in the system. And Part 111 actually allows about, I guess, until 2024, September 2024, so about 2 years for that transition to occur. So until we get to September of 24, we'll actually be running both systems concurrently, both PREA and PRD. It's just as a hiring operator, obviously, if you go to PRD on July 1st to look up pilot records, you might not find much in there, but as we get to September 2024 and you go to the PRD system, you should find all of the applicable pilot records are in that system, and you wouldn't need to use the -11 or 11A anymore at all. So hope that answers that question. And I will mention while Stacy looks up the next question for us, we do have a stop at the top of the hour. So we'll answer as many questions as we can. If we don't get through them all, then we'll respond afterward by email to you. Okay. Well, what else you got, Stacy?
I have a question from Jacob. This one is about the API, which I know is a hot topic right now. And his question is, an API integration was discussed at our previous webinar, and what is the expected timeline for development for the PRD API?
Yeah, you're right, Stacy. It's a super popular question right now. A lot of operators are really looking forward to using an electronic method to transfer records into PRD versus using a web-based form. The requirement, which begins on June 10th to begin reporting these pilot records, the only method available to do that in June is going to be a web-based form. But we are going to offer the API so that folks that have those pilot records in an electronic format, assuming that your system is compatible with the API standards, you would be able to, essentially just upload these records into PRD. So you asked about the timeline. We anticipate having the API standards published around September of this year. And then we anticipate having the API service online in December of this year. So I know everyone's super eager to have that, and we want it just as fast as you guys do. So I hope that answers the question. What else you got, Stacy?
A question from Lydia, and it's, once PREA is sunset and records data have been entered into PRD, will there be a requirement to retain records for a pilot for a certain period of time?
Yeah, good question. The short answer is under PRD, there was not a requirement. Under Part 111, once you report those records into the system, then you don't have to keep them for Part 111 purposes. There might be a couple of exceptions because there's always exceptions, but what's really important to understand is that there are often other regulations that require record retention. You know, for example, there could be a drug and alcohol requirement. There could be a Part 121 regulation that says you'll keep records for this long. There could be a 91K requirement that says you'll keep pilot records for a year. I'm making up numbers. I don't remember the exact values, but it's real important to keep in mind that, you know, there's often several layers of record retention requirements, you know, in various regulations. So I'm just telling you the Part 111 requirement, you know, and of course the PREA requirement, which we've had since 1996, has been 5 years. But just because the 5-year requirement under PREA sunsets in September of 24, that doesn't mean that there might not be some other regulation that applies to your operation that would require you to keep records. I just can't, you know, speak to those other regulations in that sense. I'd say if you have questions in that space, I would contact your local FAA office, and they should be able to answer that question for you. I think we have time for one more, Stacy.
Thank you, Chris. We'll go over, let's see. Rebecca has a question about how, it says who decides which of the training record options must be entered into PRD. I think it's also important to note how we determine and where we find that information.
Okay. Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing, the question is, you know, how do you know what records to report? I think is what I'm hearing. So the number one place to go is AC 12068 Juliet. If you look in the appendices there in the back, it's basically set up by operator type. So it starts off with Part 121 records, and then Part 135, and then it goes on down the list to, you know, what kind of records does a 125 have to report? And you'll just see a table, and it will specify exactly the record type. It'll say a proficiency check, or it'll say, you know, I don't know, insert your favorite checking event or training event, you know, in there. I think what's really important to say, since I have the opportunity here, is that the PRD does not create any new record keeping requirements for you. And so what I mean by that is, as an operator, if you don't happen to have a certain type of record, yet you see it in the back of the AC for the PRD, that doesn't mean that you have to automatically now, oh, great, now I have to keep this new record. That's not how it works. The PRD comes from a perspective of, if you have this record, if you happen to have this record for the pilot, then it would be reportable. So I think that's real important to point out. And you're also going to see like an other type of record. And that's not at all meant to imply that you have to, you know, every other record that you have, you got to report. That's really more of that gives us some flexibility from a technical perspective in the system. If the need arose for us in the future to be able to accept a certain other type of record that wasn't already built into the system. But I hope that answers it. Yeah, so just check out the AC. And if you have questions, you can just email us at prd.faa.gov. And I think on that, we're going to have to stop at that question, Stacy. I'll let you finish this up, but we will address all the outstanding questions, and we'll respond to you by email within the next day or so. Thanks, Stacy.
And thank you everyone for attending. Again, I did see a lot of questions about the record reporting, so please remember on June 16th to join us. We will have a much more in-depth webinar specifically to go over how to report records and the requirements. So thank you again. I'll have to see you soon. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. That closes our webinar for today.